we don't baptize our children because you have to consciously accept the faith as an adult. They were almost exterminated by the church in Europe all during the Middle Ages. That's why a lot of the Anabaptists came to North America, like Hutterite colonies and that. I lived on one for a while. They're amazing people. You know, they hold everything in common. They try to follow the Bible and not worldly leaders, right? So they're very different than Mormons. Yeah, don't confuse the two.
Natalie, what about the United Brethrens? Are they similar to Mormons?
I don't think so. There are a lot of people who call themselves brethren and that, so I'm not quite sure who you're referring to, but not as far as I know, but maybe you can tell me more about that.
Let me have a look. The United Brethren Church is United Brethren Church refers to two related but distinct entities: the Church of the United Brethren in Christ and the Evangelical United Brethren Church. The Church of the United Brethren in Christ is a modern denomination with international presence, while the Evangelical United Brethren Church existed from 1946 to 68, eventually merging with the Methodist Church to form the United Methodist Church.
Oh, okay. So they're more liberal free church tradition, like the Methodists. Like in England, that's why my folks came to Canada. We were Baptists, and you weren't allowed to preach. You weren't allowed to hold services unless you took an oath to the king. And Methodists were persecuted for a long time too, because they were more kind of grassroots, didn't go along with the monarchy as much. But anyway, so that's all different tradition than the Mormons.
What does Kevin think of the Seventh-day Adventists?
I don't know. I've never really had contact with them, and so I can't really comment. I mean, again, you know, you meet individuals who say, I'm Seventh-day Adventist, fine, okay. But what does that mean in terms of the institution? Any institutional church has to get tax-exempt status from the government, and that's how they're controlled. So any mainstream church with, in America, they call it 501c3 status, tax-exempt status anywhere in the world, you're an arm of the state. You're a trustee of the government then. So you're not going to rock the boat about any of these issues, right?
Kevin, are you able to connect the church with other groups that we may not be aware of? I heard the Old Fellows, Shriners, etc. are all connected.
Odd Fellows, yeah. Well, it's hard to say, you know. I mean, there's all of these groups, but I know that the Rotary Club, that's one of these groups, they were named by one of our people, Matthew McDaniel, who was working in Thailand. The Rotary Club with the Catholic Church runs child trafficking networks all over, and brothels all over Thailand. You know, the sex tourism industry, big Rotary Club involvement. So, I mean, who knows with these people? You got to dig and find out for yourself, right?
Can you ask Kevin about the Dalai Lama? Is he connected to the deep state, NXIVM network, Epstein, and took 2 million in backhanders and images of him with children?
Well, here's what I know about the Dalai Lama, and this is on the record. He's been receiving money through the CIA for a long time, and that, of course, was because of his role in resisting China and holding on to try to hold on to the country Tibet, which had been absorbed into China. And so, yeah, there's this famous picture of him with George Bush kind of smiling and going like that right in the Oval Office. But thanks for the check, George. But, you know, like the other thing, too, about him is that we had, when we first exposed some of the mass graves on the west coast of Canada, the Dalai Lama just happened to be in town, right? So one of the native elders invited him to come and meet with us to talk about these crimes of all these churches who, in fact, were sponsoring his trip. You know, like the United Church, the Anglicans, the Catholics, they were all on the Dalai Lama bandwagon. And so he refused, of course. He never showed. And they just totally ignored us. But so, you know, it's like you play the game in a big enough way. If you're an international church, you're all playing the game, you know.
All right, next question. Have you been following the Daybell trials, which is steeped in the LDS?
No, I haven't.
Okay. We've got a lot of questions coming about the Catholic stuff. I'm just trying to get all the Mormon ones out right now. Let me just see. Talking about, do they have Jehovah's Witnesses in America? Of course they have Jehovah's Witnesses in America. They're everywhere, aren't they? Okay, and we've got. Why the
Are there any,
uh,
are there any questions about the actual court case we're doing, or some of the other things on the ground I mentioned?
Yeah, people want to know what's the progress there.
Well, like I say at the start of the show, we've been having direct video conferences with the witnesses. We've got protection around them. The prosecution's putting together its case, and I'm working hard with them on that. And there haven't been any more death threats. Remember the guy who told me I was going to end up chopped up in the Ninth Circle if I carried on? Probably a member of the Knights of Columbus in Toronto, but who knows? He sure looked like the guy I saw at that protest once. But I'll be disappointed if the Mormons now don't issue a similar death threat against me. I'm thinking, what am I doing wrong, right? Now that we're talking about them, right? But no, it's proceeding. And the thing is about this court case, it requires public involvement. Like in a common law court case, people say, how do you enforce the verdict? The enforcement lies in the hands of the public. The people are empowered to be sheriffs, to be deputies to the court, to enforce these warrants, make the arrests, seize the assets and property, stop these child killers where they're operating. And we have the right and obligation to do that. So again, write to me, angelfire101@protonmail.com about how to get involved in that.
Well, I'll go over to the mostly Catholic questions then. Now, Eva, I think she's referring to what we started with the open. How known are these horrific actions? Do ordinary Catholics know about these things?
The clergy all know about it. They have to. You don't remain a priest unless you're aware of the policy of crimen and all of these actions. I found that out when I first exposed the stuff about the residential school death camps in Canada. All the clergy used to joke about it, at the gatherings. They would refer to, these kids, and if you want a child, it's easy to get a native child. I mean, they talk openly about it. A lot of the senior people in the church all know about it. It's kind of like, the way the human mind works. You don't want to look at something that upsets your worldview. So you just don't think about it. It's not like you don't know about it. It's just like, who wants to buck the system and get killed? Who wants to lose your friends and neighbors and status and job, right? Better a child die than that happen. And that's the way, unfortunately, human beings are. And so, yeah, they know. Of course they know. Maybe new people to the church don't know, but they'll know soon enough. All they have to do is look at the evidence. Go to murderbydecree.com. Right?
So Tracy wants to know, does Pope Leo know that he is going to be summoned to court?
Well, I'm sure their people monitor all these things, and so he knows, I'm sure, but he won't get the actual summons until the first week in September, when the court formally convenes on Monday, September 1st.
Your thoughts on Leo's performance in the streets of Rome, getting searched by the cops, and then his PR speech to make him look great? He had no security and took food to the cops, thanking them.
It's just the same old crap about, Bergoglio taking the name Francis and wearing a white robe all the time. He's like Francis of Assisi, don't you know? These are all just gestures. I don't know how people are taken in by this. Like, the dragon holds up a nice mask and everyone says, oh, what a pretty mask. If you know anything, you've got to see how these are just, the more people do things like that, the more they have something to cover. And it's just more of the same crap.
Question from Hamamoto. What role does so-called First Nation casinos in Kanata play in the larger system of finance and control?
I can tell you a lot about that because it's something we've researched a lot, and from our sources on reservations, and that Indian reservations in Canada and America and other places operate as prime money laundering and child trafficking and drug trafficking centers. And I know that from the people, the chiefs themselves and the people on the reserves, and that there's a place in Vancouver, for example, called River Rock Casino. It's where the Chinese mafia, the triad, they're called in Vancouver. It's where they launder all their money, thanks to Canadian senators like Larry Campbell, former mayor of Vancouver too. And the reservations are, you see, they're crown land, but they're administered by the chiefs for the crown. So even by Canadian law, you can't go in there and start hunting around. They're perfect, kind of mediums for hiding stuff. just like churches are. And it's extensive. We figure that the chiefs on the West Coast alone have been laundering money in the as much as $5 or $10 billion in the last decade. That's according to people in the RCMP who have told us that. And they also, the West Coast chiefs are using that money to sign oil and gas deals with China. These chiefs are profiting off the fact, they call them internal free trade agreements, where they don't go through the Canadian government. They sign it directly, like the Wet'suwet'en Tribal Council up near Prince Rupert, where the Chinese are coming in a big way. They sign away all the oil and gas directly with China, never go through Canadian law or government or anything. And so that's why, Charles Windsor just came to Canada. Remember, he was in Parliament. And remember what he said. This is such illuminating evidence. He said, he touted the usual line of, we are standing on unceded native land. So I said, wait a minute, the Crown is acknowledging that they'd never ceded the land? What, does that mean you're going to hand over the land to the natives now, Charlie? No, it means they're going to hand over the land to the native chiefs who are signing these deals. Because don't forget, remember that's Rio Tinto Mining Corporation that's linked closely with the Crown, and the 10 native people who they knocked off because they were opposed to diamond mining in Saskatchewan just 2 years ago. Well, I mean, the Crown and Charles and China and the chiefs, they're like that, right? And I think that's why Trump wants to annex Canada, because there's this pulling match now, and China and Canada and the Crown are going definitely with China, like their Vatican business partners, right?
Deborah said, Kevin, are the casinos allowed for silence?
Allowed for silence meaning allowed so that
like a quid pro quo?
Oh yeah. I mean, but it's always quid pro quo. Right? Everything operates that way, right?
Yes. So, Kevin, the Mormons funded a lot for the Jehovah's Witness and members, a friend from the beginning. How much of this have you delved into? I think the link between the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witness.
We haven't looked into the JW connection. If anyone has evidence about that, just send it to us. The best sources are the people out there. You might know somebody who's heard about that. Just send it to us.
Between Orthodox and liberal, where does Kevin think the Vatican should land? I think the world is realizing that there is a need for a return to the Orthodox end. Well,
I think the Vatican should be abolished. I think it's an abomination. And so I don't take wings with either Orthodox or liberal. I think the whole thing is a corrupt mess. Like I mentioned, the liberal Pope Francis supported the beatified, turned into a saint, the guy who murdered hundreds of thousands of Native people in California. So, I mean, it's all the same monster. I don't think there's any redeeming qualities to it at that level. We say to Catholic priests and Catholics, leave it. Leave the corporation. Do your own thing separately. Keep it small and local. And, that's kind of my general position.
Were all the residential schools in Canada victims to this abuse?
Of course, that's why they were set up. They were set up as death camps to depopulate the Native population. They were set up in the 1880s when the Native population had reached its nadir, and to finish off the next generation. And it's all in murderbydecree.com if you want kind of the authoritative overview of what they were. They weren't about abuse. They weren't about teaching or schooling or any of that. It was about mass murder, and 50% of them died. That's a higher death rate than at Auschwitz and Treblinka.
I'm going to pull up an image of this one so we can get to the bottom of this question. There we go. What's the deal with the Paul VI audience hall in the Vatican? Very strange iconography, upside down crosses, viper fangs, all sorts.
They hide it in plain sight. It's like the name Vicari Christi, the one who replaces Christ. It's all there. It's just that people in high levels of power have to continually say, look at what we can get away with. Look, we're demon worshippers. See? What are you going to do about it? It's that psychological aspect, and also we've already showed that this Pope Paul VI, who they name it after, was the guy who set up the rat lines that brought Nazis out of Europe over to South and North America. And he was a prominent member of the Ninth Circle. So, I mean, it's not that it isn't there in plain sight. It's people don't believe their own eyes, and they don't want to believe their own eyes. They don't own their own minds, and they can't say with their own language what's going on. And until you free that, we're still stuck in this mess.
So several people have asked about the Knights of Columbus, including Kira. Can you tell us anything about the Knights? My abusive Roman Catholic grandfather was a member. It was always a big mystery to us what KOC was all about.
I don't know enough of the details to give really an authoritative answer. I do know in practice the way they act. They used to beat us up all the time when we came and picketed Catholic churches. I got slugged by one. My friend Ricky got spat in the face. The guy who made the death threat to me recently was likely a Knights of Columbus. They're a goon squad, okay? And they call themselves Knights of Columbus because they all in favor of Christopher Columbus and what he did to all the savages over here. But it's all the same thing with different tentacles, right? And I wish I could be more specific about their history. Maybe there's other people listening who have a better knowledge of that.
Kevin, are there any good religions or good people left?
Well, there's always good people around, but it's our associations that are the problem. Religions by definition are not spiritual bodies. Religio means to tie people together, kind of unnaturally. We all have to believe the same thing. We all are walking lockstep. That's not the nature of spirituality. And talk to any native, original indigenous person, they'll tell you the same thing. Or your ancestors centuries ago would tell you that the universe is multiverse, and there isn't one understanding of God. And the minute you try to make that, you're an empire and you're a worldly power. So in that sense, no, I don't think there are good religions.
Is Kevin aware of Spencer W. Kimball's program to bring Native Americans into white homes?
Well, I've heard the name. I don't know specifically about that, but there's a whole program of adopting, right at the time they were exterminating Native children en masse. Top government and church people would adopt Native children. I think Pierre Trudeau did. He had a stepchild. Again, what's one of the signs of cultic activity is when you do that. You bring child in, you can train them and program them. One of the point of the residential school death camps was to exterminate at least half the children. They had a system lined up where when you arrived, you were chosen, like at Auschwitz. You'd go right or left. And the kids who could be used sexually or could be used in slave labor survived. The others were killed right away, often just starved to death, locked up in a room, starved to death. And so that's, I'm trying to remember the question. Tell me the question again, Shaun. This thing, I go off on tangents.
Oh, I've got the next question up already.
Okay, sorry. Maybe the person can send me the question again because it was on the verge. I was on the verge of answering the question and I got off. And anyway,
were we on the Knights or had we moved on from the Knights?
We moved on from the Knights. Yeah.
Okay, I'm trying to keep up with all the questions coming in. It's making my head explode.
Yeah.
All right, so Mary, have you heard of the World Missions Church in Florida that sends missionaries all over the world? And if so, what are your thoughts?
I don't know about them specifically, but there's things like the Canadian Missionary Alliance Church, right out of the same mindset. Usually fundamentalist churches that say we're going to bring Christ to the ones who don't have it. Well, I often say to those missionaries, you should start at home with yourselves, because how Christ-like are your actions?
Oh, the previous question, Kevin, was to do with sending natives into white families.
Oh, yeah. Right. Okay. So adopting Native children. And they would do that, the selection process. They would find the Native children who could be used and would cooperate, and they would be brought in and groomed. And those children, often by being taken to, quote, white homes, were trained how to be compliant slaves. So nowadays, if you look at all the people who are heading the tribal councils and the Assembly of First Nations, the groomed, manicured Indians on television, the Native politicians and movie stars, they were made that way to control and monitor and ultimately kill off their own people, which is what they're doing now. They have a quota of people thrown off the reserve. They have to throw off a certain number of people from the reserve every year, sign away the land to China, the resources and all that. So they were groomed that way in white families. That was part of the genocidal process, right?
Will the stolen wealth of these churches ever be returned to the people?
Only if we take it. And, literally, that's the only way it changes, when the people do it. And the governments are in bed with these churches, so don't expect them to do the legal thing and cancel the tax exemptions to these murderous institutions. Right?
What do you make of Pope Leo's offer to host peace talks between Russia and Ukraine?
That's part of the game. Yeah, I'm the peacemaker here. Although, wars never. Well, no, wars do profit the Vatican because they're heavily invested in the arms industry. Small arms like Beretta Limited that they own in Italy. But also at the same time, don't forget, power is all about image and legitimacy. So naturally, if there's a deal in the works between Russia and Ukraine, Robert Prevost has to step in and make it look like it was his because of what he did, right? So it's all the game that they play. And, I wouldn't put any stock in it.
How are they escaping justice? Well, Kevin's coming after them, so
hopefully not just me. No, not just me. I mean, I'm one of the reasons I'm the public spokesperson on this is because, spokesman actually, is that the judges, the prosecutor, the investigators, we can't lose them. Okay, if I'm knocked off, okay, fine, but the knowledge is out there. The people who are key to this have to be protected, including the witnesses. So I take the public flack, and that's worked in the past, and the results are in the doing. The results we've achieved, forcing out Ratzinger, forcing out the genocide, all that. That's because, we take that risk of being public, and it's up to all of you to support that process, right?
Do you know something about the OESSH order? Okay.
What is that? What does that stand for?
OESSH order. I will find out. Hold up. I never heard of it. So it stands for the Equestrian Order of the Holy Sepulchre of Jerusalem, Catholic Order of Knighthood.
Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Yes, that's ringing a bell. Let me look this up. It was right in her statement. The nuns who took her and tortured her originally were what is called the Missionary Sister Servants of the Holy Spirit, or SSP. It could be something very similar. And the Holy Sepulchre, Servants of the Holy Spirit, Holy Sepulchre. So I think they're part of the same group. As far as I know, what she was telling me is they ran these series of monasteries all through Germany and Poland where these rituals were done. But that OESSH specifically, no, I don't.
Right, that's all of the questions. You've answered them all, Kevin. Is there anything you'd like to say in conclusion to the viewers?
Just to remind you folks, thank you so much for the buying all the books. We sold over 1,200 books in the last month, thanks mostly to the show. That's the basic one on Vatican crimes to get. Also want to remind people, when you talk about doing stuff, you do it by recovering your sovereignty. And this is a book we wrote about, in a practical sense, a handbook on how to do that. How to take back, when you say, how to get the wealth back, well, you pass a law in your community expropriating the wealth. Go into the Catholic Church, take the money out of the collection plate. You're actually legally allowed to do that because they're a convicted transnational criminal body that's using that money for criminal purposes. And you say to the police, we're going in and taking this money and handing it out to the poor rather than feeding a criminal body. Anyway, Jesus says to give money to the poor anyway. They should be doing that. So we're going to do it for them. We've done those things, and you wouldn't believe the riot it creates. And so it's great. Direct action is always the way. And that book will tell you how to do it. So that's on Amazon as well. And a final plug for my ancestor, Peter Annett from England, the free thinker who got thrown in the stocks in 1761 in my age for pissing off the Church of England. And people say, Kev, you must be the reincarnation of this guy. But Peter Annett is called On a Different Sort of Rock. And he used to love to go after these bishops and call them names. He would deliberately poke the dragon all the time and post his writings about, he was a rational critic of religion. And he said, how could Jesus have changed water into wine? Let's look at this reasonably, right? And he would post his writings all over the East End of London. He wasn't like Voltaire sitting in a who he knew, by the way, he and Voltaire and all those guys, Tom Paine knew him. So he was, Peter Annett, very prominent deist philosopher. But he said, screw talking to the elites. I want to get out there and tell the masses of people there in London how they're having to be screwed around in their heads by organized religion, how it's enslaving them. So that's my ancestor Peter, and it's called On a Different Sort of Rock, and you can get it again at Amazon. Thank you, Peter.
Oh, it's always a great, yes, thank you, Peter. It's always a great pleasure, my friend. You take care, and all of Kevin's links in the description, the books, everything. Please support his important work. Cheerio.
Thanks, Shaun. Thanks, everyone.
All right, bye-bye. All right, thanks for tuning in, everyone. It's very important to support Kevin's work. All the links are down there if you're watching on the YouTube version. And on the 4th of June, we've got ex-Satanist Zachary King coming on. It's called Elite and Bohemian Grove Exposed. Yesterday, we had the guy in court who was allegedly drove over all of those people in Liverpool. And he's an ex-Royal Marine. So I've reached out to Chris Thrall, who's also an ex-Royal Marine. And he's been doing analysis on that story to see if he will come on. It's still one of the biggest stories in the world right now. I'm speaking to Lionel. We had Hamamoto in the chat. So we will keep the shows coming, folks. Take care wherever you are in the world. Thank you for tuning in on this Saturday night, and hope to see some of you next time. Until then.